It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when Alex Walker's life, which had always felt like an endless string of ordinary moments, suddenly shattered into something unrecognizable. He stood behind the polished wooden counter of the upscale restaurant he worked at, the same restaurant where he had poured endless cups of coffee and served plates of rich, five-star meals for the better part of 5 years. It was a job that paid the bills but offered little else, and Alex had become used to it. He was just another face in a sea of other overworked, underpaid servers, each of them surviving their own personal struggles, each of them with their own ambitions that never seemed to materialize. That particular day had started like any other. The shift had begun with Alex slinging his apron over his head, wiping down the bar and organizing the menus with a sense of routine that had become almost second nature to him. The customers came in, each with their own demands, some friendly, others not so much. Alex was good at what he did, polite, efficient, and friendly when necessary. But he had always felt like he was meant for something more. Yet nothing prepared him for what was about to unfold. As the lunch rush settled into a quiet lull, the door swung open with a sudden gust of cold air, and in walked a man that Alex instantly recognized from the news, Barron Trump, son of former President Donald Trump. Barron was not someone you expected to see in a small, upscale restaurant in their city, let alone one that catered to a somewhat exclusive crowd. But there he was, walking in with a calm, almost invisible presence, his bodyguard trailing a few steps behind. The other patrons, as one might expect, reacted with a mix of curiosity and awe, but the room remained quiet, almost reverential, as Barron walked past the bar and sat at a table near the window. Alex stood frozen for a brief moment. His heart raced. Was this really happening? He had seen Barron on television, in interviews, but in person, it was an entirely different thing. He wasn't a fan or a follower, but he knew what the Trump family represented in the public eye. The idea of being in the same room as Barron Trump felt surreal, like something out of a dream. The staff, on the other hand, was immediately abuzz with excitement. Some of them whispered to each other, speculating about the reason for his visit, while others exchanged glances, unsure of how to approach him. Alex stood at the bar, watching Barron, who had pulled out his phone, seemingly uninterested in the fuss his arrival had caused. For a brief moment, Alex felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He had always prided himself on being someone who didn't get starstruck, who wasn't fazed by the wealth and fame that so many others seemed to crave. But this moment was different. It was an opportunity, something unexpected, and for reasons Alex couldn't yet explain, he knew he had to do something. What exactly it was that prompted Alex to walk over to Barron's table, he couldn't have said. It wasn't an offer of service, he was just another waiter. Nor was it a desire for an autograph or some form of recognition. It was something deeper, an instinct that came from within him. Something told him that this was a chance, a brief window of time, to do something completely unexpected. With a deep breath, Alex walked over to Barron's table, steadying his hands as he approached. He wasn't sure what he would say, but something told him that he didn't need a script. Barron looked up from his phone, his expression neutral, as Alex cleared his throat and offered a warm, if slightly awkward, smile. "Mr. Trump," Alex said, his voice a little unsure but polite, "I just wanted to say, I admire how you've handled yourself in the spotlight. I know it's not always easy, especially with everything that comes with your family name." Barron blinked, his gaze meeting Alex's. For a moment, Alex could have sworn he saw a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or even appreciation, in Barron's eyes. Then, to Alex's shock, Barron smiled faintly. "Thanks," he said simply, his voice quiet but steady. "It's not always easy, no." That was it. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but to Alex, it felt like a profound moment. He hadn't just served a customer, he had connected with someone on a human level, beyond the expectations of who they were or what they represented. It was just a simple exchange, but it had meaning. As Alex turned and walked back to the bar, he felt a strange warmth inside, like something had shifted. But little did he know, that brief, fleeting moment would alter the course of his life forever. Later that evening, after his shift had ended, Alex was at home, sitting at the kitchen table with his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Lily. They had been talking about the day's events, nothing extraordinary, just the usual stories of Alex's work. Sarah had mentioned the odd feeling she'd had when Barron Trump had come into the restaurant, but it was mostly dismissed as a passing curiosity. But then, Alex's phone rang. At first, he didn't recognize the number. It wasn't unusual, he got plenty of spam calls. But this one was different. He answered, not thinking much of it. "Hello?" Alex said, his voice still slightly strained from the long day. "Mr. Walker," a voice on the other end of the line said. "This is Donald Trump's office. Mr. Trump would like to speak with you." Alex felt his heart drop into his stomach. His hand trembled as he held the phone to his ear. "Excuse me? Who is this?" "It's the office of Mr. Donald Trump," the voice repeated, a little more firmly. "He would like to speak to you about a business opportunity. Can you hold?" Alex's mind raced. A business opportunity? Was this a joke? He tried to steady his breath as he waited on the line, unsure of what was happening. The voice returned a few moments later, and Alex could hear the unmistakable sound of a new voice, clear, confident, unmistakable. "Alex," the voice said, smooth and assured. "This is Donald Trump. I'm calling because I've heard about your encounter with my son today. You did something I rarely see these days, you treated him like a person, not a figurehead. I appreciate that." Alex's heart was now pounding in his chest. "Mr. Trump, I didn't expect this. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. It was just a simple moment. I was trying to be kind." "I know," Donald Trump said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "And that's why I'm calling. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I see potential. I'd leave, but that was still in the future." Right now, in the silence that followed, Alex felt a sense of weight on his shoulders. He had been given something few people ever received, a chance to leave behind the life he knew, to step into something unknown, something bigger than himself. And then, without thinking, he gave his answer. "Yes," Alex said, his voice firm. "Yes, I'll do it." At that moment, Alex knew his life would never be the same. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had led to a series of events beyond his control, events that would change not only his life but the lives of everyone around him. Change your life. But you have to be ready to take a leap. Alex was speechless. His mind swirled with disbelief. Could this really be happening? The man he had just served, someone he'd never dreamed would notice him, was offering him a chance at something monumental. He had no idea what this opportunity would entail, but in that moment, he knew it could be the very thing he'd been waiting for. Alex had just made a decision. And it would alter everything. Alex Walker had always thought of himself as an ordinary man. He wasn't looking for fame or fortune, just a steady paycheck to support his family. He didn't ask for much in life. All he wanted was a stable job, a loving family, and the peace of mind that came with it. Yet, in the weeks that followed his fateful encounter with Barron Trump, Alex's perception of what was ordinary began to unravel, revealing a deeper complexity to his life, one that he hadn't known existed. Before the call, Alex's life had been simple. His routine was predictable, even comforting in its monotony. He had worked at the upscale restaurant for 5 years, serving high-end dishes to affluent patrons, managing the chaotic lunch and dinner rushes, and pretending to enjoy the stiff, judgmental atmosphere. Every day was a mix of putting on a smile for customers who rarely saw the person behind the apron and counting the minutes until he could clock out and go home. He was the kind of person who kept his head down, never complaining, never making waves. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. His wife, Sarah, worked part-time at a local boutique, while their young daughter, Lily, attended school nearby. Their modest home, with its creaky floors and faded wallpaper, was filled with the sound of laughter and love. The world outside seemed distant and far removed from their little bubble. Alex had grown accustomed to the idea that nothing extraordinary would happen to him. He was just another guy, another face in the crowd. But there was something in him, something deep down, that had always hoped for more. He didn't talk about it much, not even to Sarah, but he dreamed of a life where he wasn't stuck in the same place, going through the same motions. He dreamed of an opportunity, a chance to break free, even if he wasn't sure how or when it would come. But deep down, he had resigned himself to the idea that this was his life, and he had to make peace with it. That's why, when Barron Trump walked into the restaurant that day, Alex had been taken aback. It wasn't so much the fact that a high-profile person had walked into a small, exclusive eatery, it was the way the encounter unfolded. Barron, despite his last name and the weight it carried, seemed almost normal. He wasn't the brash, polarizing figure that people saw on television. He wasn't flaunting his wealth or acting like he was above anyone else. No, Barron was quiet, calm, and unassuming. He looked like any other young man in his 20s, trying to live his life away from the glare of the spotlight. But that wasn't all that struck Alex. It was the vulnerability he saw in Barron's eyes, something that most people probably wouldn't have noticed, but something that felt familiar to him. It was a brief moment, one that could have easily been overlooked in the hustle and bustle of the restaurant, but it wasn't. In that fleeting exchange, Alex felt something stir inside him, something he couldn't quite explain. He saw Barron not as a symbol of wealth or status, but as a human being who deserved kindness, not the kind of treatment often reserved for people in the public eye. Barron didn't ask for attention, nor did he seem to want it. He just wanted a meal, a simple moment of peace away from the chaos of his life. And Alex, without thinking, chose to treat him like anyone else, offering a small, sincere gesture of respect. That decision was the catalyst for everything that came after. The next few days passed in a blur for Alex. He tried to put the moment out of his mind, telling himself it wasn't a big deal. He had done nothing extraordinary. He had simply treated someone with respect. But when the phone call came, everything changed. Donald Trump himself, on the other end of the line, offering Alex a chance that seemed too good to be true. He hadn't expected it, hadn't even thought for a second that something like this could happen. And yet, here he was, a regular man, suddenly being swept into a world that seemed completely foreign to him. Alex's initial reaction was disbelief. The more he thought about it, the more he wondered if it was some kind of prank or mistake. But the voice on the other end was serious, the tone unmistakable. It wasn't a joke. Donald Trump, the man he had heard about his whole life, was offering him an opportunity that Alex had no way of understanding at that moment, but one that would inevitably change the course of his future. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex struggled with the enormity of the situation, trying to wrap his mind around what it meant. His first instinct was to tell Sarah, to share the news with her, but he couldn't bring himself to do it just yet. He needed time to process everything. So, he kept the news to himself, replaying the phone call over and over in his head, trying to figure out what it all meant. When he finally told Sarah, her reaction was mixed. She was as stunned as he was, but there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that this was all happening too fast, that it was too much too soon. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I mean, what if it's not real? What if it's some kind of scam?" But Alex knew, deep down, that it was real. This was the kind of thing that only happened once in a lifetime. People didn't get offers from Donald Trump for no reason. Something had sparked his interest, something in Alex's character or the way he had treated Barron Trump had caught his attention. And that something had set a series of events in motion that would change their lives forever. Still, the uncertainty weighed heavily on him. He had spent his whole life in the shadows, doing the same thing day in and day out. He was comfortable with routine, with the predictability of his life. This new world that was opening up before him was anything but predictable. The more he thought about it, the more Alex realized how unprepared he was for the kind of life he was about to step into. He had no experience in business, no idea what kind of work this opportunity would entail, and yet here he was, facing the unknown. But despite his fear, despite the overwhelming sense of unpreparedness, there was a part of him that was excited. This was his chance to make something of himself, to prove that he wasn't just another person waiting for life to happen to him. But that didn't make the decision any easier. As Alex continued to mull over his options, he couldn't help but think back to the conversation he'd had with Barron. He had treated Barron like a normal person, not someone who was untouchable or above him. And it had paid off in ways Alex couldn't even begin to comprehend. Barron had taken notice, and now Donald Trump was offering him a chance that, in all honesty, he never thought he'd get. It wasn't just about money or fame. It was about validation, the kind of validation Alex had been searching for all his life. It was about being seen, not as just a waiter or a husband or a father, but as someone who had the potential to make a real difference in the world. But as Alex stood on the precipice of this new life, the weight of the decision pressed heavily on him. If he said yes, there was no going back. His life would change forever, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, Alex knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let this abort the next day. He made the call. Unity slip through his fingers. He had waited for a chance like this his entire life, and now that it was here, he couldn't walk away. The decision Alex made to call back Donald Trump's office wasn't one that came easily. His fingers hovered over the phone for a moment before he dialed the number again, the weight of the decision hanging heavy on his chest. He was no longer just the man who worked long shifts at a restaurant, serving meals to the well-off and doing his best to stay invisible. He was about to step into a world far beyond the one he had known, a world where money, power, and influence weren't just concepts, they were realities. When the phone finally rang and a voice on the other end answered, Alex felt his heart skip a beat. It wasn't the same voice he had spoken to earlier, but the tone was equally as professional, equally as confident. "Mr. Walker, I'm glad to hear from you. We've been expecting your call," the voice said. Alex swallowed hard, trying to find his words. "Yes, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm ready to take the next step." The voice on the other end gave a small chuckle, as if the answer had been expected. "That's what I like to hear. We'll have a car sent to pick you up. Be ready tomorrow morning. Mr. Trump is looking forward to meeting with you." The line went silent, and Alex was left standing there, holding the phone, barely processing what had just transpired. This was real. He wasn't dreaming. He had just agreed to enter a world he never thought he would be a part of, one that seemed so distant from his humble roots in the restaurant business. He hadn't even asked what this opportunity entailed, he didn't care to know. Something in his gut told him that this was his moment, the one he had been waiting for, and now he had to walk through the door. The next morning, as Alex stood outside his modest home waiting for the car to arrive, he couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. He glanced over at Sarah, who was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. She had mixed feelings about all of this. Her concern had only grown since he had told her the news. "Are you sure about this?" she had asked again that morning, her voice tinged with worry. "This all seems so sudden. What exactly is this opportunity, Alex?" Alex didn't have the answers. He couldn't explain what was happening. He had no idea what kind of work he was going to be doing or what the future would hold, but something deep inside told him that he couldn't let this moment pass. "I don't know what it is yet," he replied, his voice steady but unsure. "But I have to take this chance. It's something I've never had before, Sarah. A shot at something bigger than I've ever dreamed of." She didn't say much more after that, just a small nod, a fleeting expression of support mixed with concern. Sarah had always been there for him, through the long shifts, the sleepless nights, and the quiet moments when Alex had questioned if he was doing enough for their family. But this was different. This wasn't just another promotion or raise. This was a seismic shift, one that could potentially upend everything they knew. Still, Sarah trusted him, and despite her worry, she gave him the space he needed to make this decision. As the sleek black car pulled up to their house, Alex felt his heart pound in his chest. It looked like something out of a movie, polished and pristine, far too elegant for someone like him. He felt out of place, standing in front of his house in his worn jeans and a simple jacket, but the driver didn't seem to notice. He was here for one purpose, to take Alex to the unknown. The ride to the location was silent, except for the occasional hum of the engine as the city passed by in a blur. Alex's thoughts swirled in his head. What was he walking into? What kind of people would he meet? He wasn't an entrepreneur. He had no experience in high-stakes business deals. He was just a waiter, a man who had gotten by on the kindness of others and the occasional tip. Now, he was about to meet someone whose name was synonymous with power, someone whose entire career had been built on taking risks and seizing opportunities. He couldn't help but feel like an imposter. But as the car pulled up to an imposing, modern building, Alex felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. He was no longer just Alex Walker from the restaurant. He was about to enter a world that most people only saw from a distance. The doors opened, and he stepped out, his legs shaky but his resolve firm. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. Inside the building, the atmosphere was stark and professional. Glass walls stretched high above, and the faint hum of activity buzzed through the air. Alex was escorted through the gleaming halls by a few staff members, each dressed in sleek suits, all walking with purpose. He felt out of place among them, his worn shoes clicking awkwardly against the polished floors. As they walked, Alex couldn't help but feel like a child in a room full of adults who had seen it all. But he kept his head high, focusing on the task ahead. Finally, they reached a large office at the end of the hall. The door opened, and Alex was ushered inside. The room was expansive, sleek furniture, dark wood paneling, and massive windows that looked out over the city. And then, there he was. Donald Trump sat behind a large desk, his presence undeniable. He looked exactly as Alex had imagined, imposing, yet somehow welcoming. He rose from his chair as Alex entered, extending a hand with a firm grip. "Alex," Trump said, his voice deep and authoritative. "I'm glad you made it." Alex didn't know what to say. His mind was racing, trying to process the surrealness of the moment. This was Donald Trump, the man who had run for president, who had made billions in business, who had built an empire. And now, here he was, offering Alex a chance to step into that world. "I want to get straight to the point," Trump continued, sitting back down behind his desk. "You showed my son Barron respect when so many people treat him like a symbol. I don't see a lot of people who do that. And that kind of character is something I value. You've got the kind of mindset that's rare these days, Alex. I think you could do something big. I've got a project coming up, something that's going to take guts and vision. And I want you to be a part of it." Alex's mind spun. A project? What kind of project? He couldn't even fathom what was being asked of him. He was a waiter, not a businessman. But Trump wasn't waiting for him to ask questions. Instead, he continued, "This isn't going to be easy, but I think you've got what it takes. You've got ambition. You've got integrity. And those are the kinds of qualities I look for in people I work with." Alex could barely process the words. It was happening so quickly, and yet it felt like everything had slowed down. The offer was on the table, but he still had no idea what it entailed. His mind raced through the possibilities, the doubts, the fears. Could he do this? Could he really step into this world and succeed? He had no answers, but one thing was clear: he had already stepped into the unknown. There was no going back now. After a long pause, Trump leaned forward, locking eyes with Alex. "So, what do you say? Are you in?" In that moment, Alex felt his life shift. He had the chance to change everything, to leave behind the mundane and step into something much bigger. And as he looked at Donald Trump, the man who had created empires, he knew he couldn't say no. This was his shot. This was his chance to be someone, to prove that he wasn't just another man passing through life. With a deep breath, Alex nodded. "Yes," he said. "I'm in." And just like that, Alex Walker's ordinary life was left behind, replaced with a world full of uncertainty, challenges, and the promise of something extraordinary. What he had once thought was impossible was now within his grasp. The decision Alex had made that day in Donald Trump's office didn't immediately feel like a win. It felt like a whirlwind, a storm that had swept him up in a way he didn't fully understand. Walking out of that office, Alex felt a blend of excitement and dread course through him. There was no turning back now. The opportunity was real, but so were the fears that gnawed at him. He wasn't prepared for this kind of life. He had no experience in business, no expertise in the kinds of deals that Trump orchestrated, and no idea what was truly expected of him. And yet, as he stepped into the sleek black car that had been waiting outside the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had clicked, that maybe, just maybe, he could figure it out. The car ride back was different. The weight of the decision had settled in, and Alex found himself looking out the window, lost in thought. He tried to focus on the events that had just unfolded, but his mind kept drifting back to his past, the life he had known before all of this. He thought of the restaurant, the customers who barely acknowledged him, the long hours, the tedious routines. He had lived in that world for so long, and now he was on the verge of leaving it behind. He didn't know what to expect from this new venture, but the unknown seemed strangely inviting. The uncertainty felt like freedom. When he arrived home, Sarah was already there, sitting on the couch with Lily, who was playing with her dolls. The house was as quiet and simple as it always was, but there was a tension in the air. Sarah looked up as Alex entered, her eyes immediately searching his face for answers. He could see the worry in her gaze, but also a spark of curiosity. "Well?" she asked, her voice a mixture of hope and apprehension. Alex took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family, their future. He had to be sure about this decision, not just for himself but for them as well. He sat down on the couch next to Sarah, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. "I met with Donald Trump," he began slowly, the words still feeling surreal. "He wants me to join a project with him. Something big." I said yes. Sarah didn't speak immediately, but Alex could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was processing everything, just as he had done earlier that day. "What kind of project?" she asked carefully. "What's it about?" "I don't know yet," Alex admitted, feeling a pang of uncertainty in his chest. He didn't say much. "Just that he sees something in me. He said I have the right kind of mindset, the kind of ambition he values." He paused, unsure of how to continue. He didn't have the answers, and it bothered him. "I don't know what's going to happen next. But this is real, Sarah. He's serious. He wants me to be part of something that could change everything for us." Sarah's expression softened, but her concern didn't fade. She reached out and took Alex's hand, squeezing it gently. "I know you've always wanted more for us, Alex. But, are you sure you're ready for this? It's not just about money or success. This is a whole different world. What if it's too much?" Alex felt a deep pang of doubt. She was right. He had no idea what he was walking into. This wasn't just a career change, it was a leap into the unknown. He had no experience in the world of high-stakes business deals or power plays. He had only ever been a waiter, a man who kept his head down and did his job. But something in him told him that this was his shot, that he couldn't let fear hold him back. "I don't know what to expect," he admitted, his voice a little quieter now. "But I can't pass this up, Sarah. It's a chance to build something. To prove that I'm more than just a guy working at a restaurant. And I think I'm ready to try." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and apprehension. "Just promise me you won't lose yourself in all of this, Alex. No matter what happens, stay grounded. Don't forget where you came from." Alex nodded, grateful for her support. He couldn't promise that everything would turn out the way he hoped, but he could promise to give it his all. For Sarah. For Lily. For himself. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and planning. Every day felt like a new challenge, a new hurdle to overcome. Alex was thrown into the deep end, learning things he never thought he'd need to know: business jargon, marketing strategies, investment opportunities. It was overwhelming at first, but with each passing day, he began to feel more comfortable. He had never been a stranger to hard work, and he quickly adapted to the demands of his new role. Donald Trump had been right when he said Alex had the right mindset. His ambition, his willingness to learn, and his dedication had made him an asset to the project, even though he was still very much an outsider. In this new world. One of the first things Trump had tasked him with was overseeing a new real estate development project, something that, on paper, sounded far beyond Alex's capabilities. He had no experience in construction or urban planning, but Trump had a way of making him feel like he was capable of anything. "I'm not asking you to be an expert, Alex," Trump had told him during their first meeting. "I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. You've got a unique perspective. Use it." Alex had no idea how to even begin. But he wasn't going to back down. He threw himself into the project with everything he had. He studied blueprints, learned about zoning laws, and attended endless meetings with architects, engineers, and investors. There were moments of doubt, moments when Alex felt like he was in over his head. He didn't know the first thing about real estate development, but he was learning quickly. He kept reminding himself that he was here for a reason, that Trump believed in him. As the weeks turned into months, Alex started to see the fruits of his labor. The project was moving forward, and it was beginning to take shape. He wasn't the one drawing up the plans or making the final decisions, but his contributions were invaluable. He was the one who had the vision, the one who could see how everything could come together. It was a role he had never expected to play, but it was one he had grown into. However, the weight of it all began to take its toll. The long hours, the constant pressure to perform, the expectation that he would always be on top of everything, it was exhausting. At home, Sarah noticed the change in him. She saw the stress that had begun to show in his eyes, the exhaustion that seemed to permeate every part of his life. "You're not the same, Alex," she said one evening as they sat at the dinner table. "I can see it. You're starting to lose yourself in all of this." Alex sighed, rubbing his eyes. He knew she was right. He had changed. The man who had once been content with his simple life was now consumed by ambition, driven by the promise of success. He was chasing something, but he wasn't sure what. Was it the recognition? The wealth? The power? Or was it something deeper, a need to prove to himself that he wasn't just a waiter, that he was worthy of something more? "I don't know, Sarah," he admitted. "It's like everything is moving so fast. One minute, I'm just a guy serving food, and the next, I'm making decisions that could affect entire communities. I'm just trying to keep up." Sarah took his hand, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it all, Alex. You can still be the man I fell in love with. You don't have to lose yourself to this world. It doesn't define you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had been so focused on proving himself, on making something of his life, that he had forgotten the most important thing: he was still Alex Walker. He was still the man who had treated Barron Trump with kindness, who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family. The world around him might have changed, but who he was inside didn't have to. With renewed clarity, Alex made a decision. He didn't have to let this new life consume him. He could thrive in this world without losing who he was. It wouldn't be easy, but he could balance ambition with integrity, success with humility. And as he looked at Sarah, the woman who had always been his anchor, he knew that he didn't need to chase anything more than the love and stability they had built together. This journey was just beginning, but Alex Walker knew now that he could navigate it without forgetting what truly mattered. He wasn't just a man riding the coattails of success, he was a man with a purpose, with a family, and with the conviction to stay true to himself, no matter where the future took him. As Alex settled into his new life, the weight of his decisions began to feel less overwhelming. It wasn't that he had figured everything out, far from it. The journey was still in its early stages, and the challenges ahead were many, but with each passing day, he began to feel more confident in his role. The world he had stepped into, one of business deals, power plays, and large-scale projects, had become his new reality. It wasn't always glamorous, and the pressure was constant, but something about it had clicked inside him. The man who had once served food to customers, invisible in the background, was now an integral part of a multi-million-dollar project that could change the landscape of the city. It wasn't just about the project anymore, though. It wasn't just about the success or the fame or the money. Alex realized that the biggest transformation happening wasn't in his bank account or his career, it was within himself. He was learning to push past his insecurities, his doubts, and the limiting beliefs he had carried with him for years. He had become someone who saw opportunities, who didn't shy away from challenges, and who had learned to take risks with conviction. But the most important thing he was learning was balance. It wasn't enough to just chase after the next big thing or to try to prove something to others. He had to remember what truly mattered, the people he loved, the values he held dear, and the quiet moments of peace he used to take for granted. The more he threw himself into the work, the more he found himself questioning what he had gotten into. Long hours had become the norm, and the weight of every decision, every move he made, felt heavy on his shoulders. It wasn't just about the project anymore. The stakes had grown higher. He wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was an essential part of the whole operation. Trump had trusted him, but with that trust came great responsibility. And, as with any responsibility, came the inevitable risks. The higher you climb, the harder it is to maintain your footing, and Alex had quickly learned that in this world, nothing was guaranteed. Every deal could either make or break him. But despite the stress, despite the sleepless nights and the constant meetings, there was a sense of pride in Alex's work. He could see the fruits of his labor unfolding before him. The project, which had once seemed like an impossible dream, was beginning to take shape. The real estate development was moving forward, and it wasn't just a project anymore, it was becoming a symbol. A symbol of what he had accomplished, of what he had achieved against all odds. It wasn't just a building, it was his chance to prove that he was more than the man who had once served food at a restaurant. It was a testament to his growth, to the journey he had undertaken, and to the belief that sometimes the unlikeliest people can rise to greatness. But as the project advanced, so did the complications. The challenges were no longer just logistical, they were personal. People in the company had begun to take notice of Alex's rising influence. Some admired his fresh perspective, his tireless work ethic, and his ability to see the big picture. Others, however, felt threatened by his sudden prominence. There were whispers behind closed doors, murmurs of discontent among the people who had been working in the shadows for much longer than Alex. He was an outsider to them, someone who had been handed a golden opportunity, someone who had skipped the ranks and gone straight to the top. And in their eyes, that made him an interloper. One afternoon, as Alex sat in the sleek boardroom, reviewing the latest project projections, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the tension in the room. The other executives around the table were cordial, but their eyes betrayed their true feelings. He wasn't part of their inner circle. He hadn't earned his place through years of boardroom politics or long hours spent networking with the elite. He was just a man who had been given a chance, and now, it seemed, that chance was being scrutinized. The pressure was starting to build, and Alex could feel the eyes of the room on him, as if they were waiting for him to make a mistake. One wrong move, one misstep, and it could all come crashing down. It was in these moments of doubt that Alex found himself yearning for the simpler times. The days when he was just a waiter, when his biggest concerns were making sure the dishes were cleared in time and getting a good tip at the end of the night. But even as those memories flooded back, he knew he couldn't go back. He had chosen this path. He had stepped into this world for a reason, and now he had to face the consequences of that choice. The stakes had become higher, but so had the rewards. One evening, after another grueling day of meetings and negotiations, Alex returned home to find Sarah waiting for him in the living room. Her eyes, tired but warm, met his as he walked through the door. She had always been his anchor, the one person who had supported him from the very beginning. But even Sarah had begun to notice the toll this new life was taking on him. "You're not the same," she said quietly, as Alex sank into the couch beside her. Her voice was soft, but the concern was clear. "I can see it in your eyes, Alex. You're changing. This whole thing, it's consuming you." Alex sighed, rubbing his face. He had known it for some time now, but hearing it from Sarah made it feel real. He had become so wrapped up in the work, in the pursuit of success, that he had begun to lose sight of the things that mattered most. His family. His happiness. His sense of self. It was as if he had been running a race, but had forgotten why he started running in the first place. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," he admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's like every day brings a new challenge, and the more I accomplish, the more pressure there is to do even more. I don't want to lose myself in all of this, but I don't know how to stop." Sarah placed a hand on his, offering him the comfort that only she could provide. "You don't have to do it alone, Alex. You don't have to keep pushing yourself to the breaking point. We're in this together, remember? You can step back when you need to. You're allowed to take a break." Her words cut through the fog that had settled over Alex's mind. He had been so focused on the future, on what he was building, that he had neglected the present. He had neglected the people who mattered most. And for what? To prove something to people who didn't care? To chase after an image of success that wasn't even his own? The realization hit him like a wave. It wasn't the money, the power, or the recognition that he truly craved, it was peace. It was balance. He had worked so hard to escape the limitations of his past, but in doing so, he had almost lost sight of what was truly important. The rush of ambition had blinded him, and now, with Sarah's steady presence beside him, he understood that he needed to recalibrate. He needed to step back and reassess his priorities. In the days that followed, Alex made a conscious effort to slow down. He still worked hard, but he learned to set boundaries, to make time for the things that mattered. The project he had been working on continued to progress, but Alex found a new sense of calm in the midst of it all. He began to trust the process, to let go of the pressure to be perfect. And in doing so, he found that his work began to thrive even more. With every challenge, Alex grew. He learned to navigate the world of high-stakes business with confidence, but he also learned the value of humility. He understood that success wasn't just about what you could achieve, but about how you stayed grounded through it all. It wasn't about proving something to others, it was about proving something to yourself. And with each passing day, Alex Walker was proving that he was more than just the man who had served food in a restaurant. He was a man who had fought for his place in this world, and who had come to understand that the true measure of success was not in what you built, but in who you were. As Alex settled into the rhythm of his new life, the lessons he had learned continued to reverberate in his mind. He had come a long way from the man who had started out as a waiter, uncertain and unsure of himself, stepping into the unknown with nothing but his ambition and a willingness to work hard. Now, he had carved out a space for himself in a world he had never imagined he would be a part of. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was an integral part of something bigger, something with real potential to change not only his life but the lives of those around him. The real estate project he had worked on was now nearing its final stages, and everything Alex had poured into it was about to come to fruition. But as the project moved closer to completion, Alex found himself faced with a new kind of pressure, one that didn't come from the work itself, but from the growing spotlight on him. He was no longer just the quiet, hard-working guy in the background. He had become a key figure in a major undertaking, and with that status came a new set of expectations. The media, once unaware of his existence, began to take notice. Journalists started asking questions, curious about the man who had seemingly come from nowhere to become one of Donald Trump's trusted partners. Everyone wanted to know about his rise to success. How had he gone from working in a restaurant to managing one of the largest development projects in the city? What was his secret? It was a lot to handle. At first, Alex had been flattered by the attention, even excited about the prospect of sharing his story with the world. He had been so focused on proving himself that the idea of others recognizing his achievements seemed like validation. But as the days passed and the requests for interviews and appearances grew more frequent, Alex started to feel overwhelmed. The pressure to maintain this image, to live up to everyone's expectations, was beginning to take its toll. It wasn't the kind of life he had imagined when he had taken that first step into the unknown. He had wanted success, yes, but not at the expense of his peace of mind. He remained while building it. The conflict inside him grew as he tried to balance his public persona with his personal life. At home, Sarah noticed the shift. She could see that the man she had married, focused, grounded, and steady, was starting to slip away. Alex was no longer the husband who could sit with her and talk about their dreams and aspirations. He was constantly distracted, always on his phone, always thinking about the next deal, the next interview, the next opportunity. The person who had once promised to never lose sight of what mattered most was now struggling to keep his promises. One evening, after a long day of press conferences and meetings, Alex came home to find Sarah sitting on the couch, her expression pensive. Their daughter, Lily, was asleep in her room, but the tension in the air was palpable. Sarah didn't say anything at first, but Alex could feel her gaze on him, her disappointment silently weighing on his shoulders. He had always known that this was the kind of life that could easily take everything from him if he wasn't careful, but now it was becoming clear that his fears were coming to life. "Sarah," he asked quietly, walking over to the couch and sitting beside her. "Is everything okay?" She didn't immediately answer, instead looking down at her hands, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweater. Alex could feel the strain in the air, the unspoken words hanging between them like a heavy fog. "You tell me, Alex," Sarah finally said, her voice soft but firm. "You're not the same. I don't know who you are anymore." Alex swallowed hard. He had been expecting this moment, but it didn't make it any easier. He had known, deep down, that something was slipping away, but he hadn't known how to stop it. The world he had stepped into was like a tidal wave, powerful and all-consuming, and now he was caught in its current, struggling to keep his balance. "I'm trying, Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I really am. But it feels like everything is happening so fast. There's so much pressure, so many people depending on me. I don't know how to keep up, how to be the person you want me to be when I can't even recognize myself half the time." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. She had always been his rock, the person who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. But now, she was starting to wonder if she had been supporting a man who was losing sight of what mattered most. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Alex. I'm asking you to be here, with us. To be the man you were when we first started this journey. We don't need the world to see you as a success, we need you to be present, to be the father Lily needs, the husband I need." Alex sat back, the weight of her words settling in. He had spent so much time chasing after success, after validation, that he had forgotten the very people who had supported him through it all. It wasn't the media or the business world that had gotten him to where he was. It was Sarah. It was Lily. It was his family who had been with him from the beginning, and they were the ones he couldn't afford to lose. That night, as he lay awake in bed, Alex did some soul-searching. He thought back to the days when he had first made the decision to leave his job as a waiter and take that leap of faith into the unknown. He had been driven by a desire to build something better for himself and his family, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of the simple things that had once mattered most to him. His relationship with Sarah, the time they spent together, the quiet moments that had once brought them joy, those were the things he had taken for granted. The following morning, Alex made a decision. He was going to change his approach to everything. He wasn't going to let the world of business consume him. He would still give his best to the project he was working on, but he would do it on his terms. He would find a way to balance his ambition with the things that mattered most to him, his family, his happiness, and his sense of self. He sat down with Sarah over breakfast and laid everything out. He admitted that he had been lost, that he had let the pressure and the excitement of his newfound success cloud his judgment. But now, he was ready to make things right. He promised her that he would focus on what truly mattered, that he would not lose sight of their life together. Sarah, though cautious, saw the sincerity in his eyes. She knew that Alex had always had the heart of a man who wanted to do right by his family. And she trusted that, with time, he would find his way back. From that moment on, things began to change. Alex became more intentional with his time. He started setting boundaries with work, ensuring that his days weren't consumed by meetings and endless negotiations. He made sure that when he was at home, he was truly present, no phones, no distractions, just quality time with Sarah and Lily. He began to rediscover the joy in the small moments, the family dinners, the weekend walks in the park, the quiet evenings at home with no agenda other than to be together. The business side of his life still demanded attention, but now Alex was able to manage it in a way that didn't feel like it was overtaking him. He had learned to delegate, to trust others to handle the day-to-day operations of the project while he focused on the bigger picture. He had become the leader he had always hoped to be, but now he was a leader who understood the value of balance, the importance of prioritizing the things that really mattered. As the real estate project reached completion, Alex stood back and looked at what he had helped build. It wasn't just the buildings that mattered to him, it was the lessons he had learned along the way. He had learned that success wasn't about the money, the recognition, or the power. It was about the relationships you built, the people you held close, and the person you remained, no matter how high you climbed. In the end, Alex Walker had transformed. He was no longer the man who had dreamed of escaping his past. He had found a new dream, one that was about more than just career success. It was about living a life that aligned with his values, where ambition and family could coexist, where he could be present for the ones he loved while still chasing after his goals. And as he looked at Sarah and Lily, he knew that this new chapter in his life was only the beginning. He wasn't just a man who had risen to the top, he was a man who had learned how to live a life that truly mattered.